Good afternoon. I would like to call the meeting to order. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website. Other individuals and the media may also be audibly and/or visually recording this meeting. As well, a reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during committee meetings. Our first order of business is the appointment of a chair and vice chair. May I have any nominations?
Thank you, Angela. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Pearson for Councillor Farr to be chair. And if you want to deal with that separately, and then I'd be proud to move Councillor Nan as vice chair, seconded again by Councillor Pearson.
Wonderful, and we'll need an electronic vote on that one. Yes, for both. And that's carried.
Thank you very much. It's an honor. So, Madam Clerk, we'll begin with going back to you. Thank you for kicking our meeting off. Any changes to the agenda, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair, there are 6 added communication items respecting the truck route review. Added items 5.1A through 5.1F from the following neighborhood associations: Beasley Neighborhood Association, Central Neighborhood Association, Corktown Neighborhood Association, Durand Neighborhood Association, North End Neighborhood Association, and the Stinson Community Association. These communications are to be received and referred to the consideration of item 9.1. And there are also 6 added delegation requests respecting the truck route review for today's meeting. Added items 6.1 through 6.6 from the following individuals: Rachel Braithwaite from the Barton Village Business Improvement Area, Robert Azuka, Beasley Neighborhood Association, Beatrice Keko from Environment Hamilton, Tanya Ritchie, Sean Burak, and John Neary. And these delegations are for today's meeting.
Moved by Pearson, seconded by Johnson, and the e-vote is unanimous on the amendment. And members of committee now, any declarations of interest? Nobody drives big rigs. We're going to now require an electronic vote to approve the minutes of the June 7th, 2016 meeting. A mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Pearson, and you were there. And Councillor Jackson is the seconder on those minutes from a way back when. That's unanimous. And now someone to move the communication items, and with the great thanks to all 6 Ward 2 neighborhood associations for those communications, among others. Councillor Nan, seconded by Councillor Johnson. That is just received. All in favor? Carried. Any opposed? Carried. And we require now an electronic vote to approve the delegation request. That's 6.1 through 6.6 as clerk noted. And that's moved by Johnson, seconded by Jackson. All in favor? That's unanimous. And so Rachel, our Barton Street BIA Executive Director, you are our first of what looks like 6 delegations to get things going. I'm not sure, is it a 5-minute rule for our delegates?
Good afternoon. Thank you. You guys are quick at running through everything. So I'm here on behalf of the Barton Village Business Improvement Area. And on the screen, we have our truck routes that are currently either on or running through Barton Village. Just to give you a bit of a visual. So as you can see, they're intersecting right beside 2 elementary schools, right beside 3 parks, and right beside 2 hospitals, one of which being the Children's Health Center. So very high traffic areas too. So here we have some, if I can turn this on, some stats of vehicular counts and pedestrian counts at those intersections. So this is just our intersecting truck routes that go through the BIA. So they're very, very high traffic, both vehicle and pedestrian. So they're very huge safety concerns for us with regards to having these truck routes through our BIA. There's also lots of issues with having truck routes on streets that weren't really built for it. This is some of the disrepair to the roads that happens. This is some issues with regards to infrastructure, with the bollards being knocked over, and here with the hydro pole being knocked over. So some big issues. And also, again, with it right beside a hospital zone, it's a huge concern. There's 3,000 visitors to this hospital a day, and they're going right by truck routes either side of their street. So huge concerns. We also have a part of our street that isn't on a truck route. This was taken on that part. So trucks are actually going off the truck routes and cutting through streets that are not intended and not built for trucks. So huge safety concerns there too. The old infrastructure on Barton Street, the historic built form, is basically buildings right abutting sidewalks. So as you can see on this picture here, there is really no space. There's no safety barrier, there's no trees, there's no grass. It's basically you and a tanker. So it's very unsafe. There's a lot of students and children that use these streets because, as I mentioned, the elementary schools and the parks that are beside them. We also unfortunately had a senior that was killed on our street by a tanker that was found at fault. So just another sad example. And this is a letter from our current chair for the board. So again, reiterating the fact that we do see so many negative effects, unfortunately, of having these industrial truck routes on and around the BIA that is quite detrimental to the improvement of the neighborhood. And just as an example, going back to our first slide, there was one section of our street that last year had 10 businesses open, that has bump outs and medians, and that section is the one that has no red truck routes through it. The surrounding streets would love, so our BIA is basically Barton Street, the long street. So in this section where there's no truck routes, we've seen huge revitalization. We have happy neighborhoods, we have safe neighborhoods. In this section, we do not have any bump outs and medians. Whenever we ask for them, we're told, no, it's a truck route. And it's really impeding on the development that we're seeing on Barton Street as a result. So it is unfortunate for us. So we would implore you to please look at, where possible, to removing those truck routes from our commercial and residential streets, please. Thank you.
Councillor Brenda Johnson.
Thank you, Rachel, for your presentation. And you're representing the Barton BIA.
That's right.
So I'm really glad you're here, actually, because some of the questions that float around in my mind all the time has got to do with the businesses and goods and services.
Absolutely.
So are you objecting to, first of all, can we just go to this map? So the red lines are the lines of concern?
The red lines are our truck routes. So those are the designated truck routes at present, according to the map. Yeah, and so we're more concerned about not the delivery trucks going to our businesses, but the destiny, like the industrial 18-wheelers, the tankers, the big ones going typically from Burlington Street that are cutting through.
Thank you, and that was my next question. Are you objecting to all trucks? Okay, so, and just for the record, Chair, just to let you know, I have family members that are truck drivers, big trucks, and they don't want to come downtown. There's just too many risks, there's too many obstacles, and that's not their favorite place to be. So I just want to put that out there. But to better understand this, so when I see a truck going straight down the road and doing the speed limit, it's usually when they're turning corners that it really becomes a risky venture for all. Are we on the same page with this?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. So you're not objecting to all trucks. The ones that are on delivery, thank goodness are there because that's what's helping your businesses. Okay, that's what I just wanted to get out for the record. Thank you.
Councillor Nan.
Thank you through the chair. Rachel, thanks for your presentation. I appreciate the BIA speaking a lot to safety and primarily around safety. But could you say a little bit more from the BIA community in terms of the impact of having the larger heavy trucks coming through as it relates to the business and impact on business and people stopping into the stores?
Absolutely. So it really impedes on the walkability. So I think that's why we saw the 10 businesses open in this section, because it's a much nicer street to walk along. You feel safer. You don't feel all of the dirt and the wind wash out of you as an 18-wheeler is running by you as you're going from store to store. So it's really affecting big time where our businesses are looking to open. So we're not seeing revitalization happen as quickly in the areas where there are truck routes. A lot of our businesses do also complain with regards to the dirt that affects them, on windowsills, in the door when it gets opened as people come in. Unfortunately, we all know trucks bring a number of environmental issues like sediment and dirt that gets washed up. So my technical terms there. So that is another concern for sure. And then also the noise, which really, sometimes businesses will be having conversations and they'll have to stop until the truck goes by. So there's a lot of different other issues other than just safety as well, for sure. Thank you for bringing that up.
Councillor Wilson.
Rachel, very much for your advocacy and your information today on behalf of your members. I had a conversation many moons ago with the executive director of the International BIA, Mary Pocious, the great Mary Pocious, in which she relayed very much the same information that you are, and sadly that was about 25 years ago. I am curious, as we're trying to inject a good balance and provide for complete communities so people can walk, do their shopping. Do you have an idea on behalf of your members what the traffic is in terms of how do people, what percentage of shoppers come from in and around that neighborhood, and how? And do you know if they get there primarily by foot?
Good question. So the majority of the shoppers that are from the local community, I would say by foot is by far the predominant. And when we look at our community, and I'm a member of that community, majority don't actually have cars. So they're dependent on public transit by foot or by bike. So those are their preferred method of transit. So that's definitely how they're getting around. Some of our businesses do have people travel from afar who do use cars to get there. A lot actually also have bikes come to their businesses. We have 5 Sobeys stations on Barton Street alone. So we see a lot of high traffic on bikes. It's just we often get the response where they don't feel safe on the streets with bikes, unfortunately. So that does impede a little bit of that. Yeah, if that answered your question.
It does. I think, we're learning and hearing more about the importance of complete communities with respect to the environmental impact, happier communities, and central to that is walkability. But we are impairing that objective, I think is what you're saying, by that lack of, there's no really any room for a mistake in our older parts of the neighborhood with respect to how the sidewalk meets that street, and if that street is being used by heavy industry trucks, it's a really frustrating, your reason for being here. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. No more further questions. Rachel, on your behalf, I will ask staff at the appropriate time following the delegations. We'll turn to staff and try to get a history lesson on why Barton Street remains a truck route, particularly in the areas that you've noted, and see if maybe that's just from the days of 70K plus workers in a once booming industrial sector to the north. Next up from Beasley, thank you, Rachel. Robert, and as you're coming down from the Beasley neighborhood, Robert, I want to ask the 3 staffers up there to introduce themselves to our truck route subcommittee and to our gallery here today, who you are and what role you play as it relates to truck routes in the city. Martin White first. Yes.
Can we just receive Rachel's
I'm
presentation?
going to receive them all at the end.
All at the
If
time?
that's okay, Madam Clerk? Yeah. Martin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Martin White. I'm Manager of Traffic Operations and Engineering for the city. And truck routes was in the traffic portfolio up until January of this year. And truck routes have moved to Transportation Planning Group. However, traffic will still be supporting the truck routes by doing the field work necessary for the sign erections, as well as consulting in terms of general traffic issues and traffic calming issues that overlap with cycling and trucks that Brian now and Steve now look after. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Steve Malloy. I'm the manager of transportation planning. So I will be looking after the network perspective of the truck route system as it relates to the transportation master plan and integration of our cycling master plan and pedestrian mobility plan, and how all these things interact, as well as coordinating the respective truck route and the impacts with our development reviews as well for transportation, and coordinating through our economic development partners as part of a greater goods movement strategy. I also would like to take this time to kind of introduce Omar Shams, if you could wave your hand, Omar. Omar will be our project manager leading this project, but I will be supporting him on a day-to-day basis as well. Thank you.
And I'm Brian Hollingworth, Director of Transportation Planning and Parking. As Steve alluded to, our group in transportation planning is responsible for looking at planning the long-term transportation network, but also ensuring things like the vision for complete streets, complete communities, safe cycling facilities, sustainable transportation, and the movement of vehicles is all balanced and taken into account, as well as parking.
Thanks, Brian. All right, Robert Isgula, Beasley Neighborhood Association. Thank you for coming.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robert Iskula, and I'm resident of the Beasley neighborhood. Today I have a short video to present and a letter of recommendation based on input through public input through the Beasley Neighborhood Association, which has been endorsed by 6 of the downtown neighborhood associations.
Trucks because they're noisy.
So that was just to illustrate kind of what it's like living on the truck routes and walking and getting around, doing your daily life. So to the chair of the Truck Route and Truck Route Review Subcommittee, On behalf of the Beasley Neighborhood Association, please accept the following public input to the process of establishing the scope and direction of the city's upcoming truck route review. We have learned from our community work and the development of our neighborhood plans that traffic issues are on top of everyone's mind and a major factor that affects a neighborhood's livability. As such, the BNA has advocated for a Vision Zero approach when designing streets with the goal of eliminating fatalities on our shared roads. The two-way cycle track on Cannon Street has positively influenced the experience for people who ride bicycles in this city and Beasley neighborhood pedestrians. This includes the students attending Dr. Davey Elementary School. Recently, the BNA used Ward 2's Plan Local process to advocate for safety enhancements along Cannon Street by designating the cycle track as a priority for new street trees and concrete planters, with the goal of providing residents more protection from large trucks, while at the same time beautifying the streetscape. Based on resident experiences and efforts to continually improve our community, we submit that the scoping of the truck route review reflect and consider the impacts of truck traffic on neighborhood road safety and quality of life, especially the negative effects of unnecessary industrial truck cut-through traffic along the Cannon-Wilson residential and commercial corridor. Also, due to their increasing role as locations of vibrant street life, festivals, and recreation, i.e. Cannon at James Street North, downtown's residential streets should be restricted to local delivery trucks and local road users of all kinds. In closing, we submit that when evaluating the appropriateness of directing industrial truck routes through our residential neighborhoods, that the availability of existing suitable routes be considered for trucks accessing regional highways. The volumes and speeds for which the Nikola Tesla Boulevard, Link 403, and Red Hill Valley Parkway were designed make them the most appropriate routes for cross-city industrial truck traffic, even if they are not always the most direct route. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you, and for speaking on behalf of the other neighborhood associations as well. Okay, Robert, next up it's Beatrice Ikoko from Environment Hamilton. Oh, someone's just chimed in for a question for you there, Robert. Come on back. It's Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Robert, very much for your presence today and your participation. I just wanted to make sure I understood you correctly in my notes. You're advocating that with respect to trucks, that it be restricted to just local road users and delivery? Did I?
Yeah, for anybody that has business downtown, they should absolutely be using our roads. Anybody who is does not have a destination downtown or is located downtown, then they should be going directly to the Ring Highway system.
Thank you very much for that.
Appreciate it, Rob. Very well done. Beatrice from Environment Hamilton. Is Beatrice here? Yep.
Thank you. Okay, hi. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the members of the subcommittee. Currently, the City of Hamilton has a permissive truck route system which allows trucks of every shape and size to travel the routes that are currently using. Our permissive system conflicts with the community's change and the quality of life of the people who live, work, and play in aspirations for livable neighborhoods in these neighborhoods. Therefore, in planning in the scope of the 2019 Truck Route Master Plan study, what is needed is a far more sophisticated truck route system, one that is context sensitive to and respectful of those community concerns, and that does not allow heavy industrial trucks to use neighborhood roads as shortcuts to highways. In particular, in revamping the truck route system, we ask that the city include the goals, objectives, in its goals, objectives, and guiding principles, the health and well-being of the community as a matter of utmost importance. Hamilton has some of the highest levels of harmful respirable particulate pollution, PM 2.5, in the province, a fact confirmed by data collected in the 3 provincial Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks Air Quality Health Index stations in the city. One of these AQHI stations is in downtown Hamilton in Beasley Park. with an area highly impacted by air pollution. From Environment Hamilton's many air monitoring projects over the years, working with community residents, we can attest to the fact that industrial trucks amp pollution up, adding to an already compromised airshed. For example, during our air audits, our air monitors spike significantly whenever an 18-wheel truck passes by. Our findings are backed by recent University of Toronto study that found that large trucks are the biggest culprit of near-road air pollution. Researchers found that air pollution levels right beside a major trucking route within a city were close to levels seen beside Highway 401, North America's busiest highway, despite the road carrying less than 1/10 of the vehicle traffic. When we consider that heavy industrial trucks thunder through our neighborhoods and business areas, often a truck every 1.5 minutes on some roads, the threat to public health is undeniable. Diesel exhaust is a major component of particulate matter air pollution, which has been linked to asthma, lung diseases and lung cancer and heart disease, and stroke, as well as affecting cognition and learning. So we can think of the number of schools on our truck routes. The issue of air pollution is unquestionably a justice issue. Communities living close to highways and busy roads are far more likely to suffer health impacts of poor air quality. Our understanding is that public health and public works staff are exploring ways to consider air quality impacts in sensitive land use areas as part of city's truck route study review. We applaud this critical angle and eagerly offer our citizen science data and engagement as a contribution to these efforts. As well, we are pleased that the hospital zone around the General Hospital in Barton is highlighted in the proposed study as a key location to divert industrial trucks off Victoria and Wellington, given that this is an institution in the business of public health. Thank you, former Councillor Green, for this motion. There is no reason that economic growth and healthy communities cannot coexist. As we travel further into the 21st century, people want and have a right to vibrant, safe, and healthy neighborhoods. If they are being asked to reduce their personal carbon emissions and use more sustainable forms of transportation, like walking and cycling, we must provide the conditions for them to do so. Otherwise, only the very experienced, desperate, or brave of heart will cycle on roads that permit industrial trucks to swoop willy-nilly into bike lanes. Only those with no other choice will allow their children to walk to school alongside trucks that spew black soot into their small lungs. Environment Hamilton suggests that the review commits seriously to the protection of the health of the community. Time up.
You got a minute.
Okay, and take into consideration the following: that our city is growing, new developments happening daily, and more people will be living downtown. So how will the goals and objectives of the study be compatible with healthy, livable communities? We could also include an examination of the origin destination of industrial trucks, which we don't have, and we can also formalize changes in how the routes are categorized. So designation, classification, such as in Portland, Oregon's Freight Master Plan roads. In conclusion, the City of Hamilton's vision is stated to be the best place to raise a child and age successfully. Let's make it happen by restructuring the truck route system to match this vision. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Beatrice. Councillor Nan. Well, I didn't activate you, my fault. Go ahead.
No worries. Thank you through the chair, Beatrice. Thank you so much for coming in and delegating today. I read the U of T report that you gave reference to and some of the data coming in about the impact of heavy trucks on air pollution in a very localized way. And you alluded to the fact that Environment Hamilton has been engaged in air quality monitoring for quite some time. Is there any specific data that you can share in terms of the readings or the impact that's been measured here locally?
Yes, definitely. We've been working through our Friendly Streets project with Cycle Hamilton. So we've been collecting data that's got to do, we collect PM 2.5 again, the fine particulate matter that's very toxic and very harmful. And we kind of upload it to a map so that people can actually see that. Right now the map is down, unfortunately, due to technical issues, but we've got the data. We've also been doing truck counts, so watching where the trucks are coming from and where they're going to, basically. But we would really want to see more of, in this study, an origin destination to understand really well, not just anecdotal. So some of that information, we have many people in the community that are helping us, that want to continue this work. We took a little bit of a break because of the weather, but we hope to continue doing more of that and sharing with staff.
Great, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing more of that information.
Thank you.
Myself on the speakers list. Who's the vice? Yes, Councillor Nan, if you don't mind taking the chair. Thank you, Beatrice, and for your work with Environment Hamilton and the community.
Thank you.
Recently on Safe Streets. So I pushed, and I think it was Councillor Green at near the end of last term, and then ultimately with the transfer. No, I got a question or two for you, and then you'll have another two questions. And then at the start of this term, when the TMP review came before us, the Transportation Master Plan, to expedite this process, this truck route update or review. And one of the reasons why we're meeting a little earlier in this term is I think there's a lot of important work ahead, and I think a lot of people here agree, including our staff. So when you speak through you, Chair, about health and well-being of residents being factored in during the update, that's something I definitely will be at the appropriate time in this committee meeting addressing with staff. But more specifically, you're referring to, I'm sure, all of the current mandates of council, Vision Zero,
Exactly.
multimodal, safe streets, pedestrian mobility, all of those things that currently exist. True?
True. And I would say that we, some of the work that we have done in the Beasley community, we did a mobility survey to get a sense of what the community wanted. Air quality was of the biggest concern, as well as truck traffic. Industrial truck, I want to really make sure that everyone understands that it's really the industrial trucks we're looking at. Of course, we're not talking about delivery trucks and those. So those were the major concerns. People are really concerned about health, and I think that they have good reason to be.
When we look at the truck route now as it exists today, it kind of reminds you of the front man for Big Country and the plaid shirts he used to wear all over the place.
Yeah.
Our previous speaker, Robert, representing 6 neighborhood associations just in Ward 2 alone, and even comments from the speaker before, but specifically addressed a need to focus on these perimeter expressways. Does Environment Hamilton feel seen?
Absolutely. There's very appropriate roads that trucks can be using, and we all know those. Well, I hear from another delegation where they are, but right off the bat, it's going to be Burlington Street and the Nikola Tesla Boulevard. So that there's really no real reason why we should continue to accept that trucks should be part of our those industrial trucks should be part of our communities, really, on our roads.
And finally, Beatrice, as to your origins of destinations, it's, I think, very important that we study that as part of this update. I totally agree with you. Last year, for about 4 hours on my little motorbike, I followed trucks coming off the 403, heading east down Main Street. And I only caught 7 on that hot summer Friday afternoon, but I followed them to their destinations. It was a small sampling, but a sampling nonetheless. I was hoping, but not hoping, I'd catch some cutting right through our city and getting on to either Niagara or Toronto-bound QEW. That didn't happen. All 7 actually ended up going to the industrial core. They seemed to be anyway. They went into industrial properties. 3 went into Parrish and Heimbracher, as a matter of fact. That said, I had asked staff some years ago, but we just never followed through, and I wasn't a member of the truck route subcommittee on how important that is as we examine truck routes, current and for future. So at the appropriate time, if it's not already going to be part of our study, it absolutely has to be, and it can't be me on a little motorbike. It needs to be done to perfection, because I think those findings are going to be key, and they may lead to, in quick order, some very good communications with those industries and those logistics companies running these trucks in helping them better understand what we want for our residential communities, especially in the urban area. So I thank you for that, and I will ask staff, I just wanted to let you know that I will ask staff about how important it is to them in this study that is being proposed for origins of destinations, and I'm glad you made that point. So next up for you, first time, Councillor Johnson, and I'll take the chair back. Thank you.
And thank you. And you actually just took my thunder away. Thanks, Beatrice. Good to see you. That was my question. Was you did talk about destinations, and you did talk about places of origin. Have you got a good idea of where the bulk of the problem is coming from and where they're going to?
Well, we're seeing a lot of trucks from Parrish and Heimbeck, as you just mentioned, right? And I'm sure the grain trucks. And they seem to be coming up Wellington, turn on to Cannon, heading west. or, you know, I think Linda Lukasic had put a number to that, saying there was like 77% from her kind of surveying, and that another 23% were going up the Claremont axis. So that's one example of what we've been noting. But we're going to be, you know, really we're going to track the truck soon. So we'll be doing that too.
No, I think that's brilliant because, and as you already know, that when you remove something from one community, and for instance, just even putting speed humps on one street, everybody now diverts over to another street, and then it becomes that street's problem. So that's why the origin and the destination is really important.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important to have that holistic approach.
Exactly. You know, so we've got some alternate places for them to go rather than impacting where we don't want them to.
Exactly.
So, no, that's good to know. So it is the grain place is what you're talking about.
That's one of them, yeah, for sure.
And that's the one that's down by the harbor front?
That's right, yeah.
Okay. Now you're dealing with agriculture. Yeah. No, okay. Thanks, Beatrice. That's great.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Hamiltonians are proud, and justifiably so, of our industrial heritage. For well over 100 years, Hamilton has been a hub of industry for the whole country. Our steel built the backbone of Canada, and through our docks flowed the raw materials and manufactured goods which powered the national economy. When we see the blazing skyline of smokestacks, we see jobs and industry, innovation and opportunity. Unfortunately, what we see isn't necessarily the truth any longer. Our waterfront industry employs only a fraction of the people it once did, and it has left behind well over 100 years' worth of toxicity, pollution, and inertia. Many of the old corporations, which employed thousands, have fled, abandoning the city and their former workers alike. Hamiltonians are left with what remains. And because Hamiltonians are tough, industrious types, we've put our efforts into new endeavours. Science, technology, healthcare, creativity, 1,000 new businesses and opportunities are popping up. Hamilton is undergoing a cultural renaissance. From the Depression of 20 or so years ago, we look to a bright future, and we're working hard to get there. The city has a bold vision statement, the best place to raise a child and to age successfully. Tragically, the Beasley Park Weather Station puts the lie to that statement. The weather station is a provincial air quality health index station, one of only 3 in the city. It routinely registers the highest levels of PM 2.5, that is respirable particulate pollution, the highest in the province. PM 2.5 is a confirmed cause of lung cancer in humans. With so much of our industry no longer in operation, why is this the case? Why did the Spectator's Code Red series find such a disparity in health, quality of life, and life expectancy in some parts of the city? The answer is very simple. The legacy of that industry, heavy trucking. If you tried to open a business on one of these truck routes and it created this level of pollution, zoning would not allow it. So why is it allowed when it's on wheels? Pollution from heavy industrial trucks cutting through our city has a negative effect on our health, on our safety, on the vibrancy and enjoyability of the city, and on the economy of the city and everyone in it. So why has it been allowed to go on like this? Could it be because the affected neighbourhoods are overwhelmingly lower income, home to a larger than average racialised population, the landing ground for immigrants and refugees? Could it possibly be that these people and their well-being are considered expendable when compared to economic interests? it would be facile to say that trucking is the only problem facing Hamilton, and that to fix that would fix everything. Of course it wouldn't, but it's a large part of it. The problem is symptomatic of the attitude in successive governments, both local and provincial, which is content to sacrifice the well-being, the very lives, of its most vulnerable citizens to these highways. This looks like an impossible situation. It's actually quite easy to fix, and we're calling it the truck route reboot. Heavy trucks travelling to and from the industry on Hamilton's waterfront already have a heavy-duty elevated road which will take them to and from their door to the highways. It's called Burlington Street, or the Nikola Tesla Boulevard. This street sweeps past the industry and heading eastward, it connects the QEW Toronto, QEW Niagara, and the Red Hill Valley Expressway. By instead using this one brilliant and currently underused route, all the industrial trucks which currently cut through the city can be rerouted. We've already started in this direction. There have been two-way conversions, pedestrianisation and cycling infrastructure improvements, and already development and new business is increasing. We're planning to put an LRT on King Street, which will necessitate a change of route for trucks in the near future. Rather than rejig our city piecemeal, focusing on this street or that, why not keep it simple and put an end to thoroughfare trucking once and for all? This infrastructure already exists. All we have to do is use it. Think of the money and lives we'll save. And Cannon, Wellington, Queen, King, Main, Upper James, and other streets, all residential streets, commercial hubs, centres of vibrancy and life, will become the best places for us to raise our children and to age successfully. Thank you.
Thanks, Tanya. Sean Burke is next. Good job, Tanya. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sean Barak, and I'm a resident of Ward 3, and I work in Ward 2, and I also own a business in Ward 2. And I know that a lot of people in this room are probably very familiar with the truck route and how it works, but there may be people who aren't. So I'm going to do a bit of an overview of what we're talking about here and how it affects us locally. And I read the 2010 results from the last time we went through this, and I've also read the bylaw itself, and I'm going to try and just walk through the decisions we're going to be making here, and I'll try and go quickly and get it in 5 minutes. So why do we need a truck route bylaw? Well, we already have one, so this is not breaking new ground. We've had one for a long time, but it needs to be updated. First, I want to talk about what the truck route isn't. It's not a ban on trucks. It does not prohibit trucks by time, frequency, or type. It's also not a restriction on local trucking activity. Trucks can still use roads not listed on the truck routes for local deliveries and local business. What the truck route is it's a permissive bylaw. It tells through truck traffic which streets they are allowed to use. Here's a picture of our current truck routes. As you can see, almost every street that's not a very small residential street is currently on the truck route. It's a lot of streets. The default rules for our streets are that heavy vehicles are not allowed on any street for non-local reasons. So the default is no trucks. The truck route is there to tell trucks where they're allowed to be in order to cut through. If you're a local business and you're not on a truck route, no problem. You can still ship and receive shipments to your business. This happy little blue circle you see is a business not on the truck route. No problem. The truck is allowed to leave the truck route in order to serve that particular business. And a truck can go business to business without returning to the truck route every time, as long as the shortest route between those two businesses is closer than the route to the nearest truck street. I've covered that here. Trucks must use the shortest path from the designated routes to get to their local destinations. So why do we have a truck route at all? Truck routes exist everywhere because cities recognize that non-local truck traffic causes way more harm than it causes benefits. We have it to protect the city's environment, citizens, and infrastructure, to minimize noise pollution, dangerous traffic situations, to protect road infrastructure from damage, and to create appropriate links to regional and national routes to serve the trucking industry as well. I want to return to the number one point there, which is to minimize noise pollution, dangerous traffic situations for residents and local businesses. Of course, there's a lot of economics that are going to be talked about in probably the next year that we're doing this, but we really need to come back to what's most important, and that number one thing is the effect to local people and businesses. So again, the truck route is a permissive bylaw. We saw this slide already, but I'd like to reword it a bit. It's really a bylaw exception. The truck route is an exception that gives a privilege to heavy truck drivers that they can use some of our streets as shortcuts to get from one place to another, even if they have no local business along that truck route that they need to perform. So why do our truck routes need to change? The first is there's too many streets on the permissive list. This is almost every street in Hamilton. It's quite absurd. Every meter of street that's permitted on the list has a high cost to the city. There's a social cost, quality of life. We've heard a bunch of that already today. Environmental cost, thank you, Beatrice, for that one. The health cost we've talked about is direct, you're breathing, but it's also indirect. It's not nice to be outside walking and riding a bike near these trucks, so people live less active lifestyles. There's also economic cost. It's very expensive to maintain the infrastructure, and the trucks do huge amounts of damage. And I'm going to take a little sidebar about this. Our largest budget item is roads. We're falling behind by about $200 million a year. This was 2015 numbers, $3.3 billion. We're behind in our infrastructure deficit. We can't afford to be subsidizing the trucking industry by repairing the roads that they want to drive because they want to drive a little bit shorter to get to their destination. That all comes out of our pockets. Thank you, Matthew, for this report from 2015 that I pulled these quotes from. There are more costs. It's detrimental to local businesses. It's hard to run a business on a truck route. Nobody wants to walk down the street to get to your business. And it also repels residents, and the residents are our workforce, and our workforce also attracts more businesses. So we're going to hear a lot of excuses not to change the truck route over this debate. And the debate's going to go on for months, I'm sure. The big one's going to be trucking as an economic driver. We need to take advantage of our interconnectivity. Of course, we have a very interconnected city. We have access to freight via rail, water, airplanes, and also all of the highway systems. Of course, we want to take advantage of that. And if we want to take advantage of it, people will say that if we remove one street, the trucks will need to use a parallel street. I've already heard that argument today. It's simply not true. If we break the city down into its pockets of economic driving areas, each one of these has a direct access to the nearest highway. There's no need for the East End to be crossing the city to get to the West End highway, and there's no reason for the North End industrial trucks to be going west or south to those highways when they have direct access through industrial routes to the nearest highway that they can go around.
Move to extend his time, moved by Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Wilson. Now you don't have.
Thank you. I need 2 more minutes. Changing it will make it hard to enforce. We've heard this from the 2010 report. Enforcement is frankly not the concern of the citizens or even this subcommittee. Enforcement is done by the police for the truck route. In case anyone's not sure how it's handled, it's not through bylaw, it's through the police. And in fact, if we had a simpler truck route that had only a few key streets on it, the police would functionally be able to memorize what those streets are quite easily, and enforcement could be much easier, not much more difficult. If we remember that spaghetti map that we saw earlier, that's very difficult to enforce. And this is a little screenshot of what the truckers see. The trucks are all run, as we all are, by their telephone apps, and there are multiple apps that the trucking industries use. These apps have all of the municipalities' truck routes downloaded into them. The truckers don't have to remember anything. The app tells them what they can do, and the app will not direct them onto streets that are not legally allowed on the truck routes. So enforcement becomes a non-issue over time as this gets worked into the apps and the behavior of the truck drivers. More excuses will be making trucks take a longer trip to their destination will cause pollution. Yes, if the truck has to drive a few extra kilometers, there will be a little bit more pollution. However, with pollution, location really matters. Top left corner is our code red map. I think we're all quite familiar with that. And if you're running a truck and polluting down Cannon Street, which is the top picture, versus Burlington Street, which is clearly an industrial area surrounded by factories, it really does make a difference where that pollution happens. So even if there is a little bit more pollution, if we have the power to direct where that happens, it makes a difference to the people who actually live on the streets. The next excuse will be making trucks drive longer will cause traffic. You know, Numerically, yes, more kilometers spent by a truck on the road could mean more traffic impact, but what we have right now is traffic impact by trucks using streets that really are not industrial streets. These streets have been around for 100 years before trucks ever existed, versus at the bottom there you'll see Burlington Street, which is clearly an industrial street. So if a truck has to even travel 5, 10 more kilometers and they're using streets like you see at the bottom, the traffic impact is going to be minimal compared to that same truck driving a shorter distance on our proper streets. And the last one, which we've already talked about today, is that we need to study or understand where the trucks are coming and going, which we could probably spend about a decade doing if we really wanted to take and understand each micro destination. The reality is a simplified truck route really takes all of that into account by default. We don't really need to know every single little destination. We really just need to know on a macro level where the trucks need to go to get to their nearest highway. And we don't need the precise origin and destination because local trucks are always allowed. Even if we remove streets from the truck routes, the trucks are still allowed on those streets if they have a local reason to be there. The truck route is not supposed to be a comprehensive list of every origin and path. It's not supposed to be something that tells the truck drivers exactly how to run their lives. It's just where they're allowed to be if they have no other reason to be there. The truck route, we need to think about it functionally as a list of shortcuts that trucks are allowed to use if they don't have a specific business locally to be on that street. This map I'm showing is in no way meant to be a truck route, but if you can imagine, it shows the ring highway and some way of accessing those ring highways from our major economic driving areas. So in conclusion, I won't read this whole thing, but I think I covered most of it. We really need to simplify the truck route, and we need to think about it in terms of shortcutting trucks versus local deliveries and understand that the impact of the truck routes on local deliveries is much smaller than I think a lot of us think it will be because trucks are still allowed to use the local streets. And the staff report that is going to be discussed today. John Neer, I think, is next, and he'll talk a little bit about that. But it really has a heavy-handed way of directing a consultant to functionally give us the status quo. And I think that is the wrong way to go about it. We need to take this opportunity to look at the view of our city now that we have the ring highways and we have a whole bunch of new economic drivers that aren't industrial and trucking, and take a fresh look at it. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you for the extra time. I appreciate it.
No problem. Councillor Jackson has a question or two for you.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And Sean, good seeing you again. Sincerely, I always learn when you've appeared in the past few years as a delegate here.
Thank you.
What's your thoughts on our current hybrid system? I personally have never been a big fan of it, but if you're familiar with it, sounds like you're extremely knowledgeable, you've done your homework. Our hybrid system currently allows both permissive signs and restrictive signs, which I've always thought were confusing. But Mr. Chairman, through you to Sean for a comment, what's your thought on our current hybrid system?
Yeah, so the hybrid system is a signage system only. So the way the hybrid system works is even though the bylaw is written in a way that's permissive, so it only lists places where trucks are allowed to be, we have a signage system that allows us to put up signs that say no trucks this way, no trucks that way. It makes sense, I think, for clarity for truck drivers who are new, but I really think that these days what most drivers will be using are the digital tools. So I think the way that we think about the signage, it's important, but it's probably less important than thinking about the network and how the new tools that drivers are using will kind of direct them.
Okay, thank you, Sean. And I've noticed with all the written correspondences, and so far most of the speakers, like yourself with your map, and in spite of the recent controversy that council's dealt with, it's very beneficial. One of the reasons why I supported building the Red Hill Valley Parkway and the Lincoln Alexander Parkway, for a lot of the reasons why most of the correspondences and delegates have said use the ring roads that are available. Thank you, Sean. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Sean. John Neary is next.
Councillor Farr and the other members of the subcommittee for allowing me to speak to you today. I'm just here as a citizen delegate. I don't represent anybody but myself. The other delegates today have spoken about substantive issues related to truck routes in our city. I'm not here to talk about the truck routes themselves. I'm here to talk about the staff report and the terms of reference. I'm only going to talk about substantive matters as they relate to that discussion itself. Throughout the staff report and the terms of reference that you'll be getting a presentation on next, the needs and interests of the trucking industry are consistently represented as being mandatory and objective. They're things that we have to have, and they are things that are objectively true, that people cannot disagree on. Whereas the other needs of the community are consistently portrayed as being discretionary, things we would like to have, we might aspire to have, but we don't really have to have, and that are subjective. They might not really be true. This is the very beginning of the staff report. First sentence acknowledges the importance of a reliable good movements network and freight supported land use as the backbone of economic growth in the Transportation Master Plan. That is not true. That's not in the Transportation Master Plan. There's no statement to that effect. Moving along, we have a statement about the needs of the good movement trucking industry, contrasting to the desire to minimize the negative impact associated with, not caused by, heavy vehicles. Later on, we have ongoing community concerns about the compatibility of trucks with residential areas. Again, not that there's a problem, there's concern about a problem. We move on from there to real or perceived safety concerns. They might not even be true concerns, they might just be perceived. Again, we have the needs of the goods movement trucking industry versus the aspiration to minimize impact. Last one I'll mention here, we have a toolbox of solutions for community hotspots, which is a euphemism for places where trucks have come into conflict with people. And the solutions put forward are communications and education, which gives the impression that there are not really problems, they're just perceived to be problems by residents. We also have some scare quotes about heavy trucks in the terms of reference, so the staff report consistently uses heavy without scare quotes. I want to put the truck route terms of reference in a bit of context. In terms of the scope of the consulting assignment, the first statement in the approach to the project is the consultant should demonstrate their knowledge in the design of an effective truck route network. This statement implicitly minimizes the importance of everything else that might go into this exercise except the mapping of the truck route network itself. It minimizes the importance of all the other community factors. Witnessing that, as evidence for that, here's a list of documents that are to be provided to the consultant. The overwhelming majority of these documents are about goods movement, about logistics, about the needs of industry. It does not, for example, include the report by the medical officers of health and the GTHA about improving health by design. The last major topic I want to cover is how well this document addresses the needs and interests of residents, especially those in the lower city. There's a whole section in the identified issues part of the terms of reference about rural issues, including the impacts of trucks coming to and from quarries on adjacent land uses like schools. There's no mention specifically of schools in urban areas and how they're affected by industrial truck traffic. There's no category of urban issues at all. There's a mention of the lack of a lower Hamilton east-west truck route corridor. I'd submit to the chair that we do have an east-west truck route corridor. In fact, we have several. It's very clear on this map. There's a whole web of routes, east-west, across the lower city of Hamilton. What's missing from this truck route map to be provided to the consultant is, although in fact it's in the map in the staff presentation, is the mapping of the routes outside the boundaries of the city of Hamilton that shows the connection via the 403 and QEW between Highway 6 and Nikola Tesla. So even the maps that are being provided to the consultants don't show one of the major connections between different destinations within our city. There's no mention of the possibility that trucks could be, that long distance trucks going to industrial destinations could be removed from crossing the downtown. On the list of community hotspots, there's a mention of Cannon Street. There's no specific mention of the issues at Victoria and Wellington that were in the video that Robert put up earlier. There's no mention of the trucks turning from Cannon onto Queen. There's no mention of Wilson. There's also no mention of King and Queen. Okay? This is a picture of Herman Ort. Okay? Herman Ort was killed by a truck turning from Queen onto King last year. That's his son, Russ, at the back. There's no mention of Queen and King as a community hotspot, and I wonder what community hotspot means if a cyclist being killed by a truck doesn't make an intersection a community hotspot. Finally, there's a list of meetings that need to be held in order to inform this review. 1 mandatory citywide open house, 1 optional. There's no explicit mention of a need to meet with interests other than those representing the trucking and logistics industry. What am I here to ask for? I'm here to ask this committee to request from staff a new report and new terms of reference that employ balanced language that does not treat community interests as discretionary or simply as matters of perception, to include an explicit requirement for the consultant to understand multimodal transportation planning and the application of public health principles to that planning, and to provide them with appropriate documents to inform that planning. To explicitly reconsider whether long-distance trucks should be routed across our downtown core and how they could be stopped from doing so. To add more community hotspots, foremost but not limited to King and Queen. And to require the consultant to engage in more fulsome consultation with the community at large, and particularly with interests other than those of the trucking industry. Thank you, Councillor Farr.
Sean. Can we get you to give the clerk a copy of that? It would be great if I could actually get it for the question period to staff, Angela, if that's possible.
Got printed copies if you like, Councillor Farr.
Oh, that's great. Perfect. I'll take that. She'll take your printed copies if you have enough for us, and we'll hand them out. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, John. You have some people asking some questions of you. First, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you very much for your participation and your attendance here today. Could you just go back to the slide previous to that, please?
Mm. There's a grammatical error there.
I just wanted to thank you for this valuable insight and advice.
Thank you. Through the chair, thank you, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. Thank you. Through the chair, I think the chair's request to receive the presentation in writing is exactly what I needed. You went through the requests that spoke specifically the terms of reference shifts quickly, so I missed some of the points that you had met even in the first slide. So I guess receiving it in writing would be helpful. I do wonder, though, if the public also in the gallery and those who are watching online may have missed some of the points. So if you don't mind taking a moment, just reading through your requests one more time.
Sure. So I would ask this subcommittee to request a new staff report and new terms of reference that employ balanced language that does not treat community interest as discretionary or as matters of perception only, to explicitly require the consultant to understand multimodal transportation planning and the application of public health principles of transportation planning, as opposed to simply having expertise in the design of truck routes, to explicitly reconsider whether long-distance trucks, those traveling to the industrial lands from outside Hamilton, should be routed across our downtown core, as opposed to from the nearest controlled access highway, and if not, how they could be stopped from being routed in this manner. To add further community hotspots to that's the report language, to the list, including King and Queen, including Wilson Street downtown, including other intersections on Cannon, and to require more fulsome consultation from the eventual consultant with the community at large, including specific interests other than the trucking industry.
Thank you for going over those again, John. And through the chair, I guess when we get to questions with the staff on the report, we'll go a little bit deeper there. Thank you so much.
Yeah, great job. Thank you, John, and I appreciate that, Nan. So you've taken some notes. We'll get that presentation, and I assumed I was going to do it, or one of us was going to go over each of the requests from the Beasley resident. And all presentations were very well done and certainly appreciated by this committee. And I think at this time, committee, we're best to just let staff do their presentation, keep those questions in abeyance for now, and then all of us were taking notes during those delegations. Following the staff presentation, we'll ask a lot of the questions that you were asking during. Move to receive all 6 presentations. Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Nan. All in favor? Carried. Carried. That's not an electronic vote. And a question, Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just noticed as we're sitting here and I'm listening to the presentations that a few more requests and emails are coming in, and I'm not sure if they're being directed to the clerk, but I'm assuming they'll be added
as correspondence?
Correspondence going forward. Thank you.
Absolutely. And Ange, while Steve's setting up, I tried for a couple of days at home and in my office again this morning to get this report online, and it was never on our website. It just says very generic truck route subcommittee end date, but it never did. Even this afternoon, it never was available online. Did anybody else have a trouble trying to get it online? 2 people? So. Even with the link that I sent you? The link was helpful, the eScribes link, but just as a citizen, I tend to go right into the city's website calendar, and it never popped up. Sidebar later. I'm not seeing a lot. I may be the only one. There's another guy nodding, so maybe I did something wrong. Steve, welcome to the podium.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. Appreciate you giving me time to go through this presentation, and I really do appreciate all the delegates and all their input to this. I just want to reassure them and yourselves that we at least I do, take a pride in active listening and incorporating all these comments, and if things aren't as explicit as they should have been as part of the scope of work, certainly we're not opposed to being integrative of these things and tweaking these things before we submit it to the consultant for consideration. Also, we acknowledge that staff does have a very important role to play in this undertaking. Consultants, especially in terms of engagement, the cost of consultants for engagement can be very costly, and we can maybe use their time more effectively for some technical assistance, whereas staff should take ownership and certainly get into the community and speak with different groups to appreciate and integrate their concerns, and they are taken seriously. With that, I would like to...
Can I just say, those opening comments, ad-libbed, were very important to us, and we really appreciate that you've reacted to the delegations in the way. In my history of working with you, you've always been very good at communicating, particularly on the Safe Streets file in this community. So I really appreciate you sort of ad-libbing to open this presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, through the Chair. I also just like to start maybe asking Martin White to give a short little 2-minute preamble of how we got here today before I proceed with my presentation, which I think a lot of the good points were already captured through the delegation.
Thank you, Steve, and through the chair. I guess they probably asked me to do this because I've been here longer than the truck route system has been in Hamilton. Really, this issue began prior to 2010. The truck route system prior to 2010 was very centered around providing truck access to the industrial core of Hamilton, our harbor front. Many of our arterial road network in the north-south direction, including the mountain accesses, were all truck routes. Of course, the reason was to get the goods and services down to Stelco, Canron, Stanton Pipe, and all the other businesses that were conducting their day-to-day business in the 60s and 70s, when that was the heyday and the real root of the Hamilton wealth and commerce. I think in 2010, the first truck route redo that I know about occurred. During that time, I think what we saw was some reluctance to make wholesale changes in the truck route system. During that time period, Dundurn was removed from the truck route system. Councillor Marula was adamant that Kenilworth be removed, and we looked at a few other, the staff of the day looked at a few other roads. However, the entire network essentially remained the same in 2010. I think what's happened over the last 18 years is that Hamilton has changed as a city. It's changed in its economics and its viability, and I think this is a very timely review that Steve's going to conduct, and You know, I think really the LRT is a big game changer in the lower city, along with the development of commercial and industrial businesses around the city and in Glanbrook and in Waterdown and Flamborough and those places. So it's time for a change. I think Steve's going to talk to you about that now. So Steve, I'll just turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Again, our starting point, as always, and it's been mentioned previously before, is really how does the truck route study review integrate into our overall vision for the city and strategic plan as being the best place to raise a child and age successfully. Is also, and I will be paraphrasing the Transportation Master Plan vision, essentially to create a balanced transportation network to have outcomes and create a healthier city. So those things will be guiding principles as part of this undertaking as well. And I will note that this is undertaking the truck route study review, as well as we are working with our economic development partners on doing a mini update of the goods movement study, is integrating those two studies together as part of this review. So there's an action and outcome out of the Transportation Master Plan. This is the strategic network map, as John had put up as well. One particular network, goods movement network that's not on here that has been in recent news is the Niagara Trade Corridor, and how does the future planning for that type of corridor integrate with our overall transportation network, and opportunities to use that network, that route, should that something that progresses forward through upper tier governments. Trucks are used as, first and last mile for integrating goods movement as part of other ways that we move goods through shipping or rail and airport. It also is something that supports the supply industry or support our industrial sectors in many different ways. And the movement of goods can be done even by cargo bikes. So when we're talking about truck routes, we're talking about truck routes specifically, but when we're talking the whole scheme of goods movement, things get moved as part of many different modes, including pipelines. So this is a really ugly slide, but bear with me. It's just really just to give a sense of the supply chain system, and 95% of goods at one point in time touches a truck, and they might touch a truck more than once. Certainly one example, I think locally, I'm thinking of, not to name an industry, but I will, like Lafarge, the quarries in Flamborough, taking aggregate and then bringing it into the lower city, and how they come in. So it is a local business, but it does use rural routes and have been seen through the lower city. So those are challenges as well, and those are just things to be considered as well. How key drivers in goods movement, and some of those key drivers is, I'm not going to go through all four, but the top left is the way we consume things. And certainly Amazon and using Prime and same-day delivery, that has pressures on the amount of goods that go through the city, and most of them touch a truck at one point. Maybe not a larger truck in terms of our network, but that could be the case. But certainly on a local delivery scale, certainly that has an impact, which leads to congestion, which leads to other types of transportation system impacts. And also on the bottom right, the changes in logistics involving international trade with the European Trade, Free Trade Pact and Trans-Pacific Partnership. Hamilton is becoming more of a global city and seen as an opportunity to leverage the airport for shipment of more international goods, and those goods, when they get to the ground, will be using truck. I'm not going to go over the background of this. I think it is very well captured. And I've heard from the different delegates, the need to simplify or the need to be more sophisticated. Again, these are all challenges of we don't have any preconceived outcomes as part of the study. We want to take a look at what if we went more sophisticated, what if we went more simple. those things should be all on the table and up for consideration as part of the study. And what we always look at is no matter if you do something or nothing, there's always going to be an impact. I almost say that every time I do a presentation, but we have to recognize what those impacts are and how we can quantify them. And this is just an issues list. It's notwithstanding, there's many issues, and we could have several pages of issues that I probably should have mentioned and didn't capture, but that is not done on purpose. But I will flag a couple of items here. Is complete, livable, better streets and Vision Zero, and those things that are important to us, and they are important to yourselves, councillors, representing this committee as well as other committees in council, and how does the varying types of trucks are integrated or designed out of streets through this different approach. The other thing I think I might mention is, again, enforcement. Enforcement does have a role, and what tools can we provide police to simplify their messaging or to be very clear how they're interpreting our bylaws and the Highway Traffic Act. Again, this is just a hot spot in all quotation marks. I'm not capturing everything. I receive phone calls daily on truck routes and issues, and they are broad. There's lower city issues, certainly. There are rural issues, and especially this time of year with reduced loads, I receive those quite often. And construction activities and different permits, and try to navigate this complex system of when can I be on this road, at what time, and sending people to the right path so we can get the right answers. We're mitigating that through our different public work partners and PED partners to make sure that it's very clear of what the rules and regulations are and what's enforceable as well. And again, this is just hotspots. I think everyone captured very well the lower city issues, but to be cognizant is this is a citywide issue as well. There's lots of different truck routes from a lot of different perspectives that impact on a daily basis. Through undertaking this study, we want to be data-driven and making our decisions based on best available information. We do have 2016 MTO commercial vehicle survey information that helps with some origin destinations. I believe that we will be probably not part of the consultant's assignment per se, but certainly we will be undertaking some strategic license plate trace data collection so we can understand some of the origin and destination and paths of why people are taking certain routes and try to feed that into our decision-making process. And really what this chart is to kind of demonstrate is, the different types of trucks, the heavies and then the heavy large trucks, and not to forget that even like how our roads are designed and the impact of our road design. Buses are also considered medium truck, and most of our all of our roads are designed to take that load. When we have challenges is the rural areas, and the rural areas are designed properly because they have issues of degrading road quality, and that is an ongoing issue with the city of the asset management perspective of our streets and the wear and tear of those streets and how we can make sure that we provide a balanced system that also doesn't create an economic issue and quality of life issue, of course. In terms of challenges that we have, this is just one example of the neighborhood that, Upper James is a commercial corridor. There's a lot of truck deliveries through there. I do highlight, I don't know if you can, I can't really tell on here if this is working or not, but there you go. So this is, this is the arena, this is a school, and this is a school. And then we have an employment area, and then we have commercial areas here that require trucks. And I know that, again, those are challenges that we've built ourselves into through land use decisions, that how are those trucks now supposed to get to their destination? And then that has an impact on those schools and those vulnerable road users. And this is just one neighborhood on the mountain. There's a lot of examples of that in Lower City, and those are very well communicated today. And they exist in rural areas as well. This is a citywide issue, and having that compatibility of commerce and commercial businesses that need to survive, and they rely on trucks for the delivery of those goods. So we buy them ourselves. But again, having that negative impact of affecting the quality of life of the residents through that neighborhood, as well as school children. So those are important. Those aren't lost on us. Those are important issues, and those are challenges. And of course, you know, a lot of trucks are using our boundary road system, our highway system. And then there are challenges with our existing acknowledgement that there's congestion and there's some pinch points and bottlenecks along our highway system, which creates their own air quality issues and congestion issues, and not just trucks using alternative routes through the city, if this is something that they may do, but also personal vehicles that might do the same thing and try to avoid the congestion on the boundary highway system and cut through the city, which also has a negative effect on our quality of life and how we live. So we recognize that these are challenges, and are there alternative routes, or there is value in having some redundancy in routes if that's a path that we choose to go, but obviously not creating too many routes that we create a lot of different problems. So there's a lot of balancing that we need to do. It's just really understanding the impacts of doing one thing or another, and we can't lose sight of understanding those impacts better. Although it doesn't happen very often, sometimes the port receives very large loads, oversized loads, and the need to protect some routes that will support that type of operation and that business for the greater regional economy that Hamilton is a part of. Emerging technology. These are things that are happening. We can't ignore the fact that what is the impact of electric trucks, autonomous trucks? If big companies like Walmart and Loblaws are investing in this, those will be on our roads. What does truck routes look in the future? What should they look like in the future? Do they exist in the future? What does this type of technology have? Because I'm going to tell you, they are currently permitted on our roads. There's a pilot that MTO is doing now on the highway system, and I just did a quick look before this presentation of these truck platoons that they have. Between Brantford and Woodstock is our closest pilot area. So who knows if this extends into the airport lands? What does this impact our transportation system, our livability of the community? We just really have to understand better what these implications are for the future, because we have issues now. We can't lose sight of what our future issues could be. Maybe these fleets are greener if they don't emit as much. However, if they're more silent, no one likes the noise of trucks, but at least you know that a truck is coming, versus if they're more silent, what are those issues? So we just have to understand the impacts, and in terms of this technology, we're just not there yet because we don't know a lot more information. But we just need to be conscious of it, that it's out there. As I mentioned, relevant consultations. This is not to be purposely excluding anybody. I encourage more conversations, more one-on-ones. The more discussion that we generate and more viewpoints that we have, the better. So I do encourage people to, come talk to us. Come talk to me afterwards. If we can get your contact information. I think having more genuine one-on-one conversations goes a lot further than your traditional public meeting that it kind of becomes counterproductive. So, and we're open to different ideas of consultation that people may have that we don't want to preclude. We just know that staff is going to have to take on the ownership of some of that, because that can become cost prohibitive when we get consultants attending lots of different consultations. Not that they won't, it's just we have to be strategic about that. And again, at the will of committee, we have identified some key dates and deliverables of where we want to go in terms of the timeline for the study. And those are things that, all good things, all good intentions, that this is the timeline that we'd like to follow, that by year from now, if we can have this study completed and then have something in front of yourselves for consideration, that's our target. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Councillor Nan.
Great. Thank you so much through the chair, Steve. I also just personally want to say thank you so much for your staff leadership and showing how open our process is and that we are fundamentally committed from a staff perspective for the best possible solution here. So I just personally thank you for providing that kind of staff leadership to our public. So I have several questions related to the report. I'm not going to deal with any of the questions that came from the delegation at this point, as there's other speakers coming. So on page 2 of the report, there's a reference to the new issues, and you covered it off in the slides as well in terms of the endorsement of a complete livable better streets approach, and on the list goes. And so I can appreciate as staff that you're also balancing a new term of council, and in this term of council, and these are things yet to be ratified, they're also on the docket to be developed as policy for our city to adhere to. But from an equity, diversity, and inclusion lens, I think it was mentioned by one of our delegates in terms of the frontline communities and residents who are impacted by the air quality of the trucks going down in concentration in neighborhoods. Now, you know, Ward 3 is a big section of the web as it exists right now. And so from an EDI lens perspective, it says the onus is on us from a planning perspective to ensure that we are designing a route that reduces harmful impact when it comes to health, and that we are taking the needs and concerns of frontline residents into consideration as we redesign these routes. So more of a comment, less than a question.
May I comment, though?
Please.
Through the chair, what I did not include in terms of this consultant scope is we have been talked with our public health partners and Trevor Imhoff specifically about when we develop whatever alternatives that we have is to engage him through his assignment to do some airshed modeling to see what the impacts from an air quality perspective are. And that is a partnership that we've spoke about and have committed to integrating that work into our work to make sure that we do have that lens and we do understand that if we don't do anything versus concentrating on specific routes or sending things out to Burlington and the QEW, what are those impacts through, from an air quality modeling perspective?
And then taking that air quality lens a little bit deeper in terms of the health impacts or the potential health impacts as it relates to what we saw in the Code Red study as well. And then that then feeds right into the climate emergency discussion that we had as a committee and yet to ratify at council. And the Vision Zero discussion we've been having in this term. So game changers are also the LRT and economic development, but they're also, the other game changer is the frontline lived experience of our residents, which can't be ignored this time around. So some questions. How are violations of the truck route currently tracked, and are they, do you know, through HPS? Through the chair?
Through the chair, they are partners. I'm sure they have a tracking system of that, and we would engage them on their experience. Not just HPS, but also OPP, as I've learned through this, is they also do some ticketing in the rural areas and getting an idea of what kind of numbers they have in terms of enforcement.
Excellent. And in the report, it states that in on page 5 of the report, that a significant amount of consultation was undertaken. And it includes the city departments that have been consulted with. You've mentioned now that public health vis-a-vis air quality are definitely integrated and part of the discussion as well, just missing in the report. Wondering if there was any other engagement of residents that's happened to date.
Through the chair, no, there has not been through individual residents. Certainly, we do look at all the complaints and we develop a lot of themes through certain complaints. I also personally met individually with Environment Hamilton as part of developing this, as well as with the Port Authority. And again, through our partners through economic development and all the feedback that they hear through their communications with the various stakeholders, and also through other listening to public health and their stakeholders. That so it's not. We've talked to staff, but they have networks. So those things that we don't maybe individually meet with somebody, but we do hear the community feedback.
I can appreciate that. So just from that perspective in the analysis and rationale, I would like to see some integration of the health impacts that we know from a studied perspective. Definitely we could reference the U of T research that was recently published, but specifically there is correlated evidence that speaks to the pollution that comes specifically from heavy trucks as it relates to cancer, respiratory problems, cardiac problems, neurodegenerative problems, and numerous other adverse health effects as associated to the chemicals that are in the emissions. And I think it's really important from a public health perspective that our public documents integrate that kind of analysis and information as it relates to our residents' health. I'm happy to share the report with you at a later date if you don't already have it. Bear with me, my comments are throughout. Now, in terms of the routing, I know that part of the discussion is about a map. I'm also just curious if staff through the chair could make a comment about, do we have an idling policy as it relates to our heavy trucks in our city?
Through the chair, I'm not sure if Martin would be able to answer that question.
Through the chair, the traffic bylaw does not include any anti-idling policies. The city has an anti-idling policy, but it really only affects private property owned by the city and city lands.
As I've been talking to some of the businesses that rely on heavy trucks to move their goods, they have mentioned that there is a tendency to kind of have to hold as a truck for a while, and often the engine is on and the emissions continue to be spewed. So I don't know if it's within the purview of this committee and this report, but something for us as a city to be considering. And in terms of the community hotspots that were identified, you've mentioned, Steve, already through the chair that it was complaint. Is it complaint driven, or how did you come to identifying these community hotspots?
Through the chair, in all honesty, if I was true to the community hotspots, it would be the entire city, to be quite honest and blunt. Mm-hmm. I just really it was driven through a lot of complaints that we heard and some knowledge. And again, maybe my map didn't necessarily reflect the report. Is not to preclude any particular area of any greater or less importance.
Okay. All right. Moving towards the appendix of the report on page 16 of 18, Steve, through the chair, we identify stakeholder groups, and then later it says in the scope that the discretion of it is upon the discretion of the proponent to develop their preferred engagement strategy and approach. And I wonder if it's the will of this committee and other folks around the table here feel similarly that ought to very explicitly integrate frontline neighborhoods that are impacted the most right now by the way in which trucks are. And I can appreciate that the earlier comment that you made that perhaps this is the purview of staff versus the consultant, but there's attention that needs to be given very directly to the frontline communities and neighborhoods that are impacted.
Steve, is there any objection or concern, I shouldn't say objection, if the good councillor wanted to amend that and appropriately get it voted on here today?
Through the chair, the intent of ensuring that we are engaging frontline residents is important. I think if I could sway your wording a little bit, sure, is to consider how their role in engaging the frontline residents is important. Because again, I don't want to be with my pockets out asking for more money. Mm-hmm. It's important. Staff will be doing it. The consultant will be part of that. We just want to make sure that we're not prescribing that you guys have to go to every single pop-up and every single community meeting. You come cost prohibitive to that.
Absolutely, I appreciate that, Steve, and whatever I can do from a ward councillor's office to support some of that work happening, I'd be more than happy to help facilitate some of that conversation as it relates to the frontline communities in my ward that are dealing with the health impacts and all the other concerns that have been expressed by delegates and that you're clear about already as the staff. Thank you, that's it in terms of my questions for now, thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, through you to Steve. Thank you for your report and your presentation. The reason I gave a specific thanks to Dr. Neary when he appeared is that I read the report several times and I really was struggling with it. And the reason I was struggling with it is, I don't know how else to best describe my struggle, but it was in terms of reference to guide, in my opinion, and from my reading perspective, an already desired end that was focused strictly on the accommodation of trucks. And so that is why I'm very welcoming of your opening remarks. I do appreciate that, because it would be disingenuous of me if I didn't say that I think this report, as it's presently framed, would probably not be welcome to many of the residents of the lower city, because it does seem to not give as much credence to both scientific, or what they hope will be included in the data mining of the impact on young lungs, on cancer outcomes, on air quality measures. And I think if we don't get this right in terms of the framing of it and the role of the public in that design, then I don't think it's going to serve in any interest. So to that end, little things like, I think it's really important. When I read on page 2 of the terms of reference on the 3rd paragraph, it says the objective of this review is to determine whether the existing truck route network can support the current and future needs of local, regional, and global health and global goods movement. That's not my objective. My objective is to help realize our vision of being the best city to raise a child and to age successfully. And so when I read that, I went, I had challenges with it. And also, there are a few references to consultation, and this is where I have some specific questions of you. It seems to be a nuanced difference, but I think from my experience, it's a real difference in what is our objective in consulting with the public. And in that regard, I'd like to turn to page 16 of your report under section 5.5, public consultation. Through their identified work plan, the consultant should develop a consultation plan and an effective communication strategy to ensure that people are well informed of this strategically important project. And I would submit that being well informed is only part of a communication plan, right? Because I think these people, as we've heard from our delegates today, are living with this experience every single day, and they're already well informed. They may, like myself, not be as well informed of some of the modern factors that are that soon will be dealing with our trucking industry, the cost of certain routes and travel compared to others. But I think informing and engaging are two different things, and I just would appreciate if in your approach and in your work with the consultant that full all the objectives of consultation and outreach be considered and exercised as opposed to just putting information out. And I think you've done this a long time, and I've heard every good things about how you do it, but I think if the members of the public are reading this like I read it, it gave me some concern. I did have a specific question with respect to page 13 under consultant deliverables. I'm not sure I know what an urban consolidation center is. Could you help me? Could you define that for me, please? Through you, Mr. Chairman.
Through the chair, my memory might be a little bit fuzzy on that one myself, but I believe it's, through our best practices research, there are some smaller distribution centers in like the Copenhagens and Paris and the often the example cities that are used when we have a lot of these master plans of the small, basically getting the bigger trucks to an area and then the smaller trucks distribute. And that's really what that means.
Okay, thank you. Just to add, sorry, going through my notes, the community hotspots, how are they defined in Ward 1? As it was mentioned, there was a gentleman who was killed on his bicycle at King and Queen, and their family reside in Ward 1. It shocked everyone who knew them, and it shocked those who didn't know them. And I don't want that experience to get lost. So when I didn't see the King and Queen on it, I was worried. Further to Councillor Nan's comments about what studies the consultant will have to familiarize themselves with, certainly I would hope that there would be some inclusion of collision data. I don't know if I see it on here. Air quality reports, I know some of our delegates measured some measures. Any reports from our health sector partners on injuries to individuals as a consequence of being hit by trucks. And I did have a question on page 12, staff responsibility, Steve. The third bullet, the city will be responsible for the selection process relating to any focus group and associated meeting logistics. Would you be able to comment at this point, or is it too premature what might guide that process? Mr. Chairman?
Through the chair, I don't have the specifics, so it is a little bit premature. However, we would lean upon other staff who have gone through similar processes as part of planning secondary plans and that type of thing, engagement with counselors. And it's not limited to that, as I mentioned before. This is really more of a consultant task that we're more than willing and happy to go to different community association meetings just to have a chat. So
you'll work with the ward councillors also on that?
Absolutely, and not limited to the members of this subcommittee. You guys have fantastic networks and great opportunities that you have the finger on the pulse in your own wards. You know where, say, Steve, you and Omar should go to here, and hopefully we won't give up too many weekends, but maybe one or two. We'll be more than happy to go there and represent and just be available.
I did have a rather pointed question to conclude my my questions, and it was, how will you accommodate the concern about the apparent frame of these terms of reference?
Through the chair, can you clarify specifically what you mean by that?
Well, I think through you, Mr. Chairman, one delegate suggested that frankly, they need to be rewritten to try and reframe it in such a way as to ensure that the livability, the health issues, the vision of the city is not deemed as secondary. I was wondering how, in going forward out of this committee, how will you deal with maybe that request to reframe or rewrite?
Through the chair, is very minor edits, in my opinion, to reword the phrasing of it and the approach of it. My strong belief is complete, livable, better streets and Vision Zero are very important things, and they have been embedded in this document. Again, this was scoped for the consultant assignment. We recognize that staff has ownership of it, and as I had mentioned before, and hopefully it's clear to everyone in the room that we will partner with public health. We have had previous conversations with Environment Hamilton. We have a very good dialogue, and we'll continue to have that, and whatever information that they have to make sure that we have that broad-based understanding of all the different issues that we have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Steve. I appreciate all the information today. Having sat on Truck Route Committee since its inception, I know that it is an arduous process, and you know, we want to do it right. I always say, you know, we want to do it right the first time, and make sure that we can implement something that'll work and be safe for the whole city of Hamilton. And I want to thank the presenters that came today. Certainly, you know, we all understand the issues, and I think we all have issues with trucks in our ward. So first, I just want to appreciate the previous speaker, Councillor Wilson, mentioning the accident, you know, the unfortunate accident that occurred last, I think it was August, on Queen, and it is highlighted on the map because I was looking for that. It is highlighted on the appendix of presentations that Steve presented, slide 11, because I saw that highlighted as a hot spot. So I just wanted to let the councillor know that it is there, and I certainly was looking for that as well. So Steve, appreciate everything that's been brought forward today and the history of how, you know, processing. I mean, I brought all of my paperwork and how we've dealt with this over the years. So through once it's awarded to, I'm assuming, a consultant, then we would have, is it staff and the consultants that will have meetings? Is that what the intent would be?
Through the chair, I think we've kind of set up a framework of if it's of the will of committee to introduce the consultant to the committee to have that understanding, that FaceTime, or even individual meetings. We can maybe, if we can time it right, have one-on-ones so that they're here, make the best use of their time. We're very open and flexible to the will of the committee of how they would like to be integrated with the consultants, and hear it from the horse's mouth as opposed to the other end here of what those issues are.
And I appreciate that, because I certainly would like to at the appropriate time, and I know there may be residents listening from Stony Creek, and let me see what's the gentleman that's Omar, I think it is, that you mentioned, is the staff person. I know he responded to a couple of residents in Ward 10 with regards to ongoing issues of truck access from the industrial area on the north side of the QEW. And I want to be sure I put that on the record, that I have said to the residents in the area that I would certainly be looking at the removal of the truck routes on the Grays Road and Millen Road overpasses, because they are going into a very quickly developing residential area. And the reason I also want to mention is because I was very proactive in removing highway commercial zoning on the north side of the QEW through that stretch, because there were proposals that came forward, and I knew that that would only exacerbate the problem, because now I have a highway commercial, which obviously will allow for truck traffic. So I just want to be sure that's on the record. I want to also ask, because it has been mentioned about restrictive versus permissive signage, and we've gone through this every review. I know Councillor Johnson's just moaned. We've gone through this every review, and I know I've had some permissive signs changed in Ward 10 to restrictive, and it has helped. So can you just enlighten us on that, and is that's part of the review as well, Steve?
Through the chair, yes, we would be investigating if the current hybrid system versus a different system would be most appropriate.
Appreciate. And trucks being off the routes. So I'm getting a lot of that. And I'm going to say honestly, a lot of I'm getting more calls in the last month or so, but it has to do with development and construction in the ward. So I'm getting development dump trucks that are going into the neighborhoods. They're going onto a site, and then they're going through. Are there proper routes that are designated to these construction companies when they do this?
Through the chair, thankfully you've asked me this question today and not last week, because I do have a sort of an answer for you. So through the chair, when a development occurs, what's typically issued to them is a site disturbance permit. And then through that site disturbance permit, they have specific instructions of hours of work, what kind of mitigation if they're dragging dirt or dust onto the roadway that they need to clean it. So they're very prescriptive of what that permit entails. And if they're not abiding by their permit, it can be revoked. It's my understanding. So we're not issuing permit folks for the city, but that is something that I've learned over the last week.
Who is the permit issuer? The building department?
Through the chair, I'm not quite sure if it's the building department or growth
follow up.
We'll follow up.
It's a good question to have on the record, because I know that wherever there's development, this is what we're dealing with, and certainly on the other is the 50 road and 50 road accesses. I'm getting that huge impact. And I just, you touched on right at the beginning, you mentioned about the ongoing, and I know I read it in the news a week or two ago about the ongoing discussion of the mid-peninsula routing. And I think that would be a huge, and I've always supported that, it would be a huge catalyst to remove some of the problems that we're having throughout the whole city, correct?
Through the chair, it would certainly help in the bottlenecks on the QEW, and those improvements would help alleviate in creating a better, and specifically recent terminology has been used as a trade corridor, so not necessarily a route for personal vehicles, but specifically for trade.
Thank you, and I know that a presenter did raise the point that most of transport trucks, most of the industrial trucks are all on a app system or programs. But I don't believe they all are. So my question would be, in part of this study that's being done, are we going, and I know we do go out to the trucking industry, but do we ask them why they're taking the routes that they're taking?
Through the chair, that is part of this undertaking, is to gain a better understanding of that.
Appreciate that. And lastly, I just want to say and ask, and I'm not sure staff, and this has only just come to my attention last little while. We spoke of the Nikola Tesla Boulevard. That was raised several times. And the signage from the Skyway. I've been told that there's confusion because now we just have Nikola Tesla Boulevard. We don't have Burlington Street. So a lot of the trucking industry has created confusion, and I'm wondering if that's created a reason these trucks are going where they're not supposed to be, because they think, well, that's not the road I want. So is there an issue, too, that we should be dealing with more appropriate signage?
Through the chair, I will look into that issue. I was unaware of that one.
So I just wanted to put those on the record, Mr. Chairman, because I think it's important, especially for the residents in my area and both the trucking industry and the residents that have raised these concerns over the last couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Steve, thanks for your presentation. So Steve, on page 16 of 18 about the stakeholder groups, I can't approve this recommendation with this very limited number that you've got. City project. So this is over. You want to report back by the end of Q3 of 2020 is your ideal direction. So that's over 18 months. You're going to have only 2 more meetings of the Council Truck Route Subcommittee over 18 months. You're going to have only 2 meetings with the business community, the BIA and the chambers, and we got about 10, 12 BIAs across the city. You're going to only have 1 mandatory open house and possibly an optional engaged meeting, and 1 council meeting to finalize. I simply can't support this with this limited number. And my worry is, Steve, if you say, Councillor, staff have ownership, if you approve this terms of reference day, in spite of hiring a consultant, staff have ownership of the project, and we can tweak this here, we can tweak this there, that leaves it far too open-ended and uncertain. So, Mr. Chairman, through you to Steve for possibly a comment, Steve, to help me to be able to at least get this conversation officially started by approving the terms of reference today, but I simply cannot, with this such limited number of civic engagement, neighborhood engagements, and even the truck route committee, meeting one more time this year and once more next year, far too few.
Through the chair, at the mercy of the subcommittee, if you would wish to provide direction on additional consultations and to beef this up, we're open to that.
So, Steve, thank you for that, for your open-mindedness. So, without me suggesting to you, look, I think we need 7 more of these and 12 more of those, help me with the language today, please, that would at least accommodate a lot of flexibility where necessary, and the consultant wouldn't go, well, Councillor, you approved such a limited number. I'm sorry, we're working within the focus of the terms of reference, Mr. Chairman. So, Steve, just help me with some general language that in your stakeholder group chart on page 16 allows for a lot of accommodation and latitude if necessary. Through you, Mr. Chairman, please.
Through the chair, maybe I'll just ask Brian to.
Director Hollingworth, please. Director Hollingworth.
I'll take a shot at it. We could add a sentence that additional truck route subcommittees can be called at the discretion of the chair. So that covers off that, and also that staff will accommodate additional focus group meetings, workshops, etc., as required as part of the study.
How about the open houses, neighborhood engagements, Brian, those type of that type of area as well?
The open houses is a question for us, and we were actually hoping to get a little bit of feedback from this community as to your desire for open houses on a citywide basis. They may tend to be just draw huge crowds and be of limited use, and we're looking for more creative approaches. We're not opposed to the citywide open houses. We just think there may be a better way to deal with that.
Through the chair, if I may interject.
Thank you, first of all, Brian. Yes, Steve?
In just undertaking the transportation master plan, where we did take a very cognizant effort of doing public open houses and several other engagements, we did 18 citywide public meetings. In terms of value for time and money, the attendance of those is very poor. And some of this discussion was good. However, the amount of money that was spent at that, we didn't get as much as going into the community and staff taking that ownership and meeting that. So I don't object to doing more. I think maybe 16 is or 18 is high, but this is a city-wide issue that if you have direction on geographical coverage or that type of thing, that would be good for us to know, and we can integrate that into this.
Not to brag, Steve, but I think on the transportation master plan, you said, Councillor, the 2 up in Ward 6, I think I had about 40, turned out at each one of those 2. You said they were probably 2 of the best attended, but anyways, maybe that's a learning lesson from what we did there. I sense that the TMP was done last term of council, I'm going to guess what, about 2-3 years ago, Steve, Mr. Chairman, through you?
Through the chair, that's correct. Yep.
I'm just sensing as the months and years going along, with some traditional and some new ideas that are merging together, I'm sensing a greater appetite across the community for a greater amount of safety and what would make things safer for people, for families, for neighborhoods to thrive. So maybe, Steve, a lesson learned and how we can maybe promote more. All I'm asking for is don't lock in the numbers in your chart today, and if I support this, you go, well, Councillor, you supported only 2.
Through the chair, that's a fair point. I mean, we're not bound to these, and I think the language that Brian provided is good, but we won't, include, not limited to this amount. So we want to make sure that, and maybe that's another speaking point of when we do have a consultant on board, is to refine that in consultation with yourselves individually, or come back to the subcommittee of this is the consultation plan. Okay, so Steve, how about if Angela, you captured that language, what Steve just finished saying, in consultation with,
and maintaining a broad scope with the Council Truck Routes Subcommittee, this body, in terms of allowing for a greater number of meetings, civic engagement, without limiting it to what is currently in this chart, I could then support it. Mr. Chairman, through to Steve.
Through the chair, yes.
Okay, and lastly, for some new colleagues of mine and for some in the gallery who don't live on the East Mountain, Mr. Chairman, about 10 years ago, I still have a very active citizens committee led by Chair Kate Fraser. They did a wonderful job and lots of research homework. Long story short, they lobbied myself, City Council, to and Councillor Brenda Johnson was invited to a couple of those meetings, and through Environment Hamilton, that's right, when she was a citizen representative through Environment Hamilton, was great support. And so we got the Kenilworth access taken off the truck route from Main Street up to Upper Ottawa. It was just, I saw some of the pictures today along Wellington and Cannon. You can imagine being stuck behind an 18-wheeler, Mr. Chairman, watching one of those trucks as it's trying to negotiate those extremely tight bends, making its way up to Kenilworth access, let alone the degradation of the escarpment face and greater amount of falling rocks that were occurring, et cetera. So anyways, the committee was successful. Council provided unanimous support to get the trucks off of the Kenilworth access. However, Steve, I might say, it was easier to do, and this gets back to Sean Burak's presentation with the ring roads in 07, 2 years in advance of council supporting the East Mountain Group to get the Kenilworth access off the truck route officially. It was an easier sell to do when the Red Hill Valley Parkway, Mr. Chairman, was open 2 years earlier, which one of the benefits of that was to get the trucks and heavier trucks off of the beautiful Kenilworth access onto those proper ring roads. Anyway, Steve, I just thought I'd share that for those that may have not been aware of that historical knowledge. And Steve, if you and Brian are committing to as much flexibility on future meetings, consulting with all of us, then I can support at least letting this conversation officially begin today. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
I have myself on the speakers list, so I'm going to pass the chair to Councillor Nairn. Thank you, Councillor Nairn. I appreciate the last comments, and I think you alluded, Steve, in your presentation to how, you know, in the last 10 years or so, we have made adjustments, but they've been sort of ad hoc, and I recall Councillor Jackson's good work that started with the community group and then ended up with unanimous support at council. I don't remember if there was a whack-a-mole effect, but in all likelihood there was. I remember Councillor Marula's motion, and I definitely remember working with Councillor McCaddy, who was considerate enough to tell me once he took Dundurn off how I felt about that and the potential impacts, and there were, on Ward 2. But this is not that. This is the starting point for a universal look and ultimate report and decision on that report by council that is looking at the situation, obviously globally, broadly. Slide 3. And while you're going to that, you keep referencing, you're worried about, a couple times you have, Steve, costs and budgets. On the Appendix A, on financials, we don't actually have numbers. So what is the cost on this consultant study?
Through the chair, through a roster assignment, the upset limit would be $150,000.
Okay. How much would it cost if we were to contemplate it here and ultimately council to run a parallel engagement consultation? Speaking to all of the questions and things we've heard and the stuff you've been involved with in your career here.
Through the chair, I would hate to give you a false number, not understanding the true depth of the engagement that we would like to achieve.
Okay, through you, Chair, then, before we get to your slides. So good points have been made about what we're asking of this consultant. And I need to understand, and I think others might be helpful too as well, what sort of expertise are we looking for in a consultant? Because when you look at, we're going to provide the proponent with traffic bylaws, truck routes from the past, good movement studies, airport studies, Metrolink strategic goods movement study. It's a bulk of what we're handing over speaks to, it looks like an expertise on somebody that's into goods movement and not necessarily into our cycling master plan. So is that what you're looking for?
Through the chair, most our consultants, certainly the consultants that are on our roster, are multidisciplinary firms that have expertise in a number of subjects: traffic engineering, goods movement, pedestrian, cycling, traffic signal design, the whole gamut of transportation services. That's why we chose that route, to make sure that we have well-rounded, available system of consultants that we could use.
So if we added to the scope and put a little more emphasis, a lot more emphasis on handing them materials like our transportation master plan, I think that's actually in there, but all those mandates of council over the years, Vision Zero, health reports that speak to a real focus, even most recently and no doubt unanimously tomorrow, our environment emergency declaration, second in Ontario, that kind of thing. Those consultants that are going to bid on this would also be qualified to consult greater with the community on those aspects and build in those aspects in this report?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay. So from a budgetary standpoint, through you, Councillor Nan, to Brian, I guess, is there no reason why we shouldn't contemplate an enhancement to this 150K to achieve some more robust engagement objectives?
Through the chair, we have been concerned that the $150,000 does maybe constrain us a little bit.
You mentioned it twice.
Steve was unwilling to give a guess at the value of the consultation could include, but in my past experience, you know, when you start building in some additional focus groups, additional open houses, maybe some social media aspects, web page, etc., you could quite easily rack up $100,000. So I'd give a range of $50,000 to $100,000, and again, it's a huge, wide scope. But we're talking that order. It's not a, it's not a $10,000 increment we're talking about here. If we want some really more fulsome consultation, Martin may be able to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe under the roster system, you can direct award up to $150,000. But there is a provision for a higher amount if you go to a couple bids, but still staying in the roster system, and I can clarify that. I think.
So through the chair, that is correct. We can do a direct award up to $149,999. The range between that number and $249,999 through the roster assignment, we would have to get 3 different bids. Beyond that, we would then be required to get an RFP.
Okay. So what's the upset limit then without the RFP?
So we would still have to delay, through the chair, to get 3 bids from 3 different consultants on the roster, up to $250,000.
Through the chair.
250, okay.
Yeah, 250, but it's not a full request for a proposal, so it's a streamlined process. You require 3 fee estimates and scopes instead of a direct award.
Okay. Through you, Councillor. So the financial section says the review is funded through the council-approved 2017 capital budget. Are you running low on project number 46617200924? Is that all you have left? Do you have access to another $100,000?
Through the chair, in that budget ID, there's $200,000, but we do use $50,000 for logistics and materials and that type of overhead.
So through you, Chair, to Martin, what are we at right now with our red light camera reserve? Knowing that this absolutely fits the bill for funding, that reserve would, if we wanted to enhance that budget.
Through the chair, I think there's somewhere approximately $6 million, but we're projecting the fund to be unstable and possibly not sustainable at the current spending rates.
Why you always say that. And I'll come here on a Sunday night when the lights are out and it's like fireworks going off every 2 minutes at the corner of Bay and Main. All right, that's millions, and I'll look to you, Councillor Jackson. Councillor, well, the camera flashes so often you'd think, we were It was the 4th of, sorry, it was Canada Day. Through you to the chair, the current chair, to Councillor Jackson, who's working on a modified motion because he spoke to some very relevant points. I'm wondering if I can appeal to you to further modify, to respectfully request staff utilize 100K of additional dollars from the red light camera reserve to achieve what you're adding, in addition to addressing the issues we're hearing about further public engagement. Broad right now, but it's clear from, you just need to rewind the tape and watch 6 delegates to get a very good understanding and previous questions from our councillors. So you get where I'm going with that, and with your expertise, you can, with that 100K, do some parallel work that will really help inform, in the end, an ultimate approval on this thing, right? And maintain the timelines, for give or take, through you, Councillor.
Through the chair, the timelines, I will be a little bit less commitment on, but we'll shoot for that. That is our target. But with a lot of intense public engagement, yes, we would. We can do a lot more with more money, obviously.
Thanks, Steve. Slide 3, then you're there. Do I not see the link on that? Just a quick question. Some reference to it earlier.
This would be the
oh, right, sorry. It always cuts through the middle. Yeah, okay, so it is there. Slide 7. You mentioned international goods. And I think it was the bottom right. Yes, we're becoming global as a city. I appreciated the point, and I'm sure a lot of people in the business world in this city, and I see our BIA head from downtown Hamilton is also here, or was anyway, appreciate that point. However, international goods don't get dropped off at the corner of King and Queen. So they get dropped off major expressways and highways. So I'm trying to understand a little bit better what point you were making there. So if you could add some more clarity for my purpose.
Through the chair, the whole AEGD area, depending on different land uses and what distributors or people who are working through there, not everyone's going to be taking directly from the airport to Highway 6 and out to the highway network. There'll still be Dickinson Road and Lancaster Road and Upper James that will be used as a truck route.
Right.
So I think just recognizing, and also through the chair, DHL is one of the big, I think, current tenants at the airport, and they go all over. So it's not always international goods. It could be international goods going to DHL or some other kind of express courier.
Will we at all be looking at, I mean, cities like New York, we're not New York, I know, through you, Chair, have time restrictions. They have smaller trucks once they get into heavily urban areas. Is that something that's going to be a consideration for us?
Through the chair, I think that is part of the goods movement strategy that we are trying to work parallel with through this process with economic development on that, and that was kind of the reference to the urban center acronym. I think UCC. I forget the other name of it. So that concepts are all part of the conversation.
Okay. So good. Slide 12. License plate tracers. Fascinated by this, and you talked about it briefly when I brought up this issue a couple of years ago, and we embedded it and tried to expedite through the TMP. So how does that work exactly?
Through the chair, so that was kind of a speaking point. This data that you're seeing here is taken from our all-day traffic count recorder that we had, and that kind of distributed this classification. However, license plate traces, really, it's a matching. So there was used video, and you would set your strategic points of entry, and then the potential outlets where you might think that they might end up, and estimate the amount of time it would take them to get from point A to point B, C, or D, and then through that time period, you could do specific. That's a license plate match. That's a license plate match. So you know exactly people who are entering on Main, where they end up at certain exit points in the study area that you create.
Thanks. A lot was covered. I just want to make sure. to some of the comments and questions. So one delegate, Sean, said functionality gives us the status quo, quote unquote. Your reaction to that? I think you kind of covered a little bit on your improv intro, but what was going through your mind and heart when you heard that?
Through the chair, I don't usually go into studies with a preconceived outcome. I try to take things objective and balanced. I think in terms of consensus building, and that is going to be part of this process, is agreeing on how we reach conclusions. You may not always like the answer, but if you agree on the approach, and obviously we have a little bit of tweaking to do on our approach in terms of this consultation, it could be throwing everything out. I don't know what that is. I don't want to preclude that we're going to put the status quo in. I don't think that's an acceptable thing. I certainly heard it loud and clear from this committee that that's an acceptable thing. What the outcome is, I don't know until we go through the process.
Through you, Madam Chair, to our oldest guy up there, Martin. You've been in this game, when are you retiring? About 2 weeks from now or something? So you've been in this game a while. You don't have to answer the retirement question. Through you, Chair. Now, when you first began, there was no Link, there was no Red Hill, there was no boulevard named Nikola Tesla, and there was a heck of a lot more industry. And now when you look at the couple of maps that we've seen here today from the delegates and from the presentation from Steve, and then contemplate the history, but what we're looking at now, in terms of expressways, almost a ring road. It never was, and that was never a good idea to cut a highway through the north end anyway. But when you contemplate what we have surrounding our more urban areas, the older city of Hamilton in terms of those two expressways and the connectivity to our industrial core, north of Burlington for the most part, and wards 3 and 4 for the most part, do you see in your expertise over all these years real potential, it's a very general question and you don't have to get into specifics, to modify to a great extent this historic grid pattern of truck route, particularly through our inner city? In short, we have perimeter expressways now. We didn't when you started. Do they help us to achieve a much more modified truck route system on our city streets?
I will answer the question first by saying I'm retiring at the end of next month.
I told you not to say. I was close, a couple of weeks.
However, I would say to you that there's been some substantial changes in the transportation network over the 39 years that I've worked here. And I think the things that didn't happen are almost as important as the things that did. The perimeter industrial road was one of the things that was on the books in the early 80s. It was to complete the connection between Burlington Street around the harbor and reconnect to the 403 at York Boulevard. That piece never got built, and it precludes westbound destined heavy vehicles from exiting to the west onto the 403 without coming through the core in some fashion. Hence the former or current truck routes on Dundurn and Queen Street leading to King Street to get onto the 403. We need to do a better job of getting those vehicles into the west. The advent of the LRT is going to have significant impact. I think we all know that. We're not even sure what it's going to do yet to the transportation patterns. I think we need to see those results. The entire city is developing differently now than it was in the 60s and 70s. The commercial districts and industrial districts that are coming in along Nebo Road are having significant impact on the trucking activity in Councillor Jackson's ward, and in Councillor Clark's ward. There's an inundation on heavy vehicles trying to access those points now. They need access to the provincial highway system, hence the importance of the Mid-Penn Highway, if that's what they're going to call it, or access out to our current 403 and Queen Elizabeth Way. And we know that congestion is already beginning on our terminal ramp system from the RHVP and link to those networks. So, I mean, this is the best time possible to start looking forward, and the work that Steve and Brian's group are going to be doing are going to form the basically the rules of engagement for the next 15 to 20 years and the success of how Hamilton feels and operates. So, you know, you're in the right time for this. This is a good thing to do right now.
How many kilometers, Martin, from Wellington Street to the QEW? East to the QEW? Who said 6?
I'm not sure. It's about 7 or 8 kilometers, I would think. I'm not sure.
Not even. Steve?
Through the chair, I don't know off the top of my head. However, I did do a sensitivity of, I think I chose Lafarge as the example. I think it was basically 17 kilometers from their operation there at Highway 8 and near Sydenham, that area, to their cement plant there at Victoria. Now, if they took the QEW, the distance would double. It would go to 34 kilometers, and then that timing, depending on the congestion on the bridge and that type of thing. So it's about double the distance, double the time.
Yeah, I personally feel, and I'll just have to leave this comment out there in the wind and let the consultant mull it over. Other than Highway 6, I think that's your only question mark. That's the one we got to figure out in terms of Main Street cut through to the industrial core. I don't see from Toronto, from Windsor corridor, I don't see why big trucks, heavy trucks, whatever you're labeling them, can't stay on expressways till they get to Tesla. Really, it's just stuff coming from the north that we need to figure out. And yes, it's probable that Lafarge or industries up there that are shooting down here or are not going to be happy with doubling their kilometers, but that's the balance we need to find. So, and it makes sense to me to have the greater engagement to ask those questions and figure that out. So I'm going to leave it at that. I appreciate the extra time, and I appreciate the opportunity to chair this, because I know I'll be calling more meetings, as has been suggested, and I think people that have delegated already will appreciate that as well. So I will take the chair back. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wilson, second time. I'm sorry, Brenda, did you go already? Your first time? Okay, Councillor Wilson, can you indicate again, and Councillor Brenda Johnson, first time.
And thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's just really a segue from what Councillor Jackson was referring to, and that was the community engagement. I know for a fact that on that side of the table, wards 13, 15, and 12 all have community councils. So that's also an avenue to go to. We have e-blasts. We have our own websites. I do community meetings. We get 75 to 100 out every time we have one. So I think the open house is almost archaic in one sense, and I think we need to think outside the box. We can reach more people with the social media we have today. It doesn't have to be the open house. And quite frankly, as a private citizen, I always was not a fan of open houses. It was, to me, that conquer divide attitude. Rather than having a presentation and having your questions and answered, then this gentleman might ask the same question I'd never thought of asking, and now I got all the information when I go out the door. So I'm just throwing that out there to you. Please use us as counselors. I'm going to voluntold everyone around the table, but use our connections, use our social media outlets, and when we do our community meetings, community councils that are in effect, you can get the word out a lot quicker. It's a little bit more on the personalized side. You may have to adjust your presentation just considering what audience you're adjusting it to. And the other issue I have too is, and it's always been asked around the table, is what about the rural side? If you go to your slide 3 and take a look at the rural truck route, it's a lot less than it is in the quote-unquote urban proper. So that in itself creates problems because goods and services can't get through the countryside. If they do, they have to go right downtown, like downtown Bimbrook, for instance. We have bike lanes, we have, schools and parks, so we're up against the same problem. So again, holistically looking at everything, that includes rural and urban. Maybe some of the load from the urban can be lifted and put into the rural or vice versa. But anyways, please just think outside the box, and maybe the wording could be a minimum or least this amount, but this is our bottom line, but we're hoping to achieve twice as much. I don't know, but please think outside the box. That's my last thought with this.
Stephen, you've referenced different ways to engage, so that's appreciated, and I know you're quite capable of thinking outside the box. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to piggyback a little bit on my colleague, Councillor Jackson. I'm going to come back to these terms of reference, Steve, because what we need is more than wordsmithing here. And I am very uncomfortable with how they are presented. And I would like to submit to you and to my colleagues that there has to be a clearer priority and jumping off place of what is the vision that we're leading with. How will we evaluate these options? And it has to be against our vision as a city to be the best place to raise a child and to age successfully. And in the absence of that, clearly, I'm not going to be supporting these terms of reference. So I would like my colleagues to think about that, please. I'm very, very uncomfortable with any what might be perceived as political theater and using the real tragedy of people to make a point. But I'm going to do that right now. And I'm going to read something. My colleagues, if you will help me a little bit. The squeaky wheel gets the oil. If you have a vision with passion, people will support you. I'd like to recognize the Ort family who have to live every day with the memory that their father was crushed by a truck at the intersection of Queen and King. I made a commitment to them that I will be mindful of Herman's wisdom in my own path to try and realize some wisdom of my own. I keep his wisdom pieces in my wallet, and I bring them into council chambers every single day when I sit the privilege of sitting around this table. And I would implore my colleagues to think that our decisions have impacts on people's lives. The Ort family, Russ, is a small business owner. He's not anti-business. He moves his goods around the city like many other entrepreneurs. But I think that it would be, I don't want Herman's tragic death to be lost on us, and the importance of considering the real life consequences of our unwillingness to lead with purpose. And our purpose around this chamber, as far as I'm concerned, is to ensure that we have a city that is built for people, not trucks. And that is what I think we have to lead with. And until we make that vision statement clearer in these terms of reference, I cannot support them. I don't think we heard a delegate today suggest that they're anti-job, they're anti-business. I think they have lived experience. I think Dr. Neary made some insightful comments. Everything from
what are the talents and skills of the consultant that we're looking for? Do they have a multimodal background? Is their firm informed by public health principles? And I'm sorry, I want to apologize to my colleagues if I've made them uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable with public demonstrations of emotion, I really am. But on this one, I made a commitment. And I know my colleagues have made the same commitment to their constituency that we're going to lead with purpose and with the health and well-being in mind. And I would like our terms of reference on this item to reflect that purpose. Mr. Chairman.
You have wording accordingly. Specific to your concern, do you have a motion or an amendment?
Well, I was pleased to see in the presentation there was a statement, our vision. That is not reflected in the direction that we're giving to the consultant. And that has to be the first sentence, that we're going to assess this. So again, I apologize to my colleagues, and I apologize to the Ort family if I have abused their trust, but it is, this has to be our purpose when we're going forward. And as long as I can get some sense in the beginning of this that is how we're going to evaluate these options, it doesn't mean we're anti-business, it doesn't mean we're anti-truck, but that is the measure right there.
Steve, can you bring some sense of?
Absolutely, it is the will of council to add that direction as the vision, overarching vision of this undertaking. Absolutely.
I would be happy in my amendment, and I've had a chance to whisper to the mover of another amendment to introduce that right at the top of my amendment. So mine is about enhancing the budget so we can cover off enhanced public engagement by 100K, and I'm fine with any wording you may suggest, because I think we want the same thing. Putting people first, which is the name of an old master plan, or that our vision to be the best place to raise a child and age successfully is paramount in the additional engagement that will enhance the final report. Whatever you like, and sure, hold on, let me put you back on, Maureen. There you go.
It's not just paramount to how we engage, and in our engagement, it's imperative and paramount to how we're evaluating these options.
Okay, so I think as chair, you probably need to offer some amendment or some motion accordingly, and we can come back to you if you want to put that together. Steve may have a suggestion. It looks like he's raising.
So if I may, through the chair, interject. Again, through our transportation master plan, we took a very cognizant effort to align with the strategic plan, and specifically to outcomes and healthier city. So I would also add adding the vision of the transportation master plan that looks at a balanced transportation network and creating a healthier city for all residents as also an important value that we want to add to that, and have healthy outcomes.
Councillor Wilson, you have an opportunity between now and tomorrow to actually amend at council at ratification. I'm assuming this truck route subcommittee, is it 2 councils from now? Yeah. Oh, okay, well, okay. So between now and Public Works, you could really put something together if you like. Okay, April 1st, okay. Steve, thank you, and I still have some second-time speakers. I think Councillor Jackson wants to move the motion, but first, Councillor Nan, and oh, you took yourself out because you were helping me out again. Thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
That was an acting chair role. I forgot to cancel my.
So you want to speak second time?
No, my indication was here from when I was in acting chair role, so I apologize.
Again, yes, I caught that. All right. We're going to have to get you to sit beside me for future truck route subcommittees. Councillor Jackson, with your motion, please.
So thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Steve and Brian and Martin. Excellent work, and for those that presented. So my amendment would be on the B part of the recommendation where it says that Appendix A of the truck route master plan review be approved. I would insert there as one amendment, subject to additional opportunities for civic engagement and public meetings and TRSC, that's us, Truck Route Subcommittee meetings and mainstream and social media be accommodated. And that's seconded by Councillor Johnson. So once again, to read it out, Angela, after the word be approved, I'm amending it to say, subject to additional opportunities for civic engagement and public meetings and TRSC meetings and mainstream and social media be accommodated. So Steve, Angela, and Mr. Chairman, I'm trying to leave that as broad as I can so that nobody feels restricted over the next 18 months. Mr. Chairman, seconded by Councillor Johnson.
Councillor Johnson?
No, actually, it was just to amend it because I don't believe we're approving it yet until Councillor Wilson comes back with the vision. And is that right? Or is it just to
she'll have a separate motion altogether in time for.
Just process, that's all I'm asking. Okay, thank you.
I believe. It looked like she was in a compliance with that, unless she has something for today. So I have a quick question. Councillor Nan, you don't need to turn your mic on. It's a very quick question. Can you not amend it further? Steve, there's been a few comments by staff, particularly Steve, and suggestions from our colleagues around this ring to have this think outside the box engagement approach. And I don't know if maybe it's worthy of the mover to consider and or other aspects of engagement that may that the process may find relevant.
And or other aspects.
Okay. Thank you. I got the chair back. And all in favor? That's a recorded vote. Yeah, for the amendment. Just on the amendment. Sure, we can hear it one more time before the vote, no problem. Councillor, oh, I need to, there you go.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, Councillor Wilson, I didn't realize you had ducked out of the meeting just for a second. Okay, so on the B part there, after the word approved, be approved, that I'm saying amended to be subject to additional opportunities for civic engagement, public meetings, TRSC, that's us, Truck Routes Subcommittee meetings, and mainstream and social media opportunities be accommodated, and any other aspect that staff would deem appropriate. Seconded by Councillor Johnson.
Okay, all in favor?
Thank you.
Problem, and I'm going to relinquish to you again, Councillor Nan, and I have a item C, I guess, unless our clerk Angela wants to say otherwise. I was going to tag this on to the addition Councillor Jackson just made, but instead, item C, that 100K from the red light camera reserve be dedicated toward enhancing the current terms of reference for the truck route master plan review budget, and that the additional budget primarily be directed at this enhanced public engagement to inform the final report. So it speaks to the addition that Councillor Jackson made anyway, and I have it here for you. You can. I don't have anybody here. You might activate your mic. Yeah, I'll read it again. So I'll read it again, and then I'll. There, you're on, okay. That 100K from the red light camera reserve be dedicated toward enhancing the current terms of reference for the truck route master plan review budget, and that the additional budget primarily be directed at enhanced public engagement to help inform the final report.
Moved by Councillor Farr, seconded by Councillor Jackson. Questions or comments on the motion? Councillor Wilson. 1 second, Councillor. Yep, there we go.
Sorry, just so I understand, the additional monies of 100K is to support the consultant in their work, or all of these iteratives that Councillor Jackson has set out? Just so I understand, because frankly, I don't need a lot of money to do my engagement, so I just want to make sure I understand where it's heading.
Steve could answer how we easily spend 100 additional.
Through the chair, it would be probably a large portion of that would be probably the expectation of the consultant to attend a lot more robust meetings and just a quantity of it. Also, there is again, an overhead cost to booking of venues and depending on the location of the event.
So for clarity, it's to allocate funds towards the consultant in attendance to additional meetings as per Councillor Jackson's amendment, as well as increased overhead administrative costs for hosting public and civic engagement. Any other questions, or Councillor Wilson, anything else to add?
No, not at this time.
Any other questions on the motion? So the motion is on the table. All those in favor, please e-vote. The motion carries. Passing the chair back to Councillor Farr.
Thank you, Councillor. Move to receive the presentation from staff. That's moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Brenda Johnson. All in favor? Sure. Thank you again, Steve, Brian, Marty, and who? Omar? Omar, you're going to be a busy man. That's all, and that's carried. Any notices? Oh, Angela, Clerk Angela.
Can we just approve the recommendations as amended?
All in favor? Or moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Jackson. All in favor? It's carried unanimously. Any notices? None. Any items of general interest? None. Move to adjourn. Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Jackson. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you to all of our delegates, and we'll see you again soon, I'm sure.